Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Parshas Matot-Masei, Tavshin Pei 5785, and we are going to begin from the beginning of the parsha, which is Perek Lamed, chapter 30, Pasuk Beis, verse 2. Vayidaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatos. Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes, Livnei Yisrael Lemor, of the children of Israel, saying, Zeh hadavar. This is the thing, this is the matter, Asher tziva Hashem, that Hashem has commanded. Ish ki yidar neder l'Hashem. If a man makes a vow to Hashem, or he shavah shvuah, or he makes an oath, le'asar isar al nafshay, to establish a prohibition upon himself, lo yachel devarai, he shall not desecrate his word, chalo yitzei mipiv ya'aseh, according to everything that he has said he shall do. Okay. So what we have here is the Torah mentioning something called a neder and something called a shvuah, which in English we translate a neder as a vow and a shvuah as an oath. What's exactly the difference between them? That's what we're going to discuss tonight. Now, in order for us to gain a better, but now the point is though, that the Torah says a person makes a vow or an oath to establish a prohibition on himself. That means that a person has the power through their words to make something that is permissible forbidden on them. Or, as we're going to see, something that you would not be obligated to do, or something that you would be allowed to do, you can actually create an obligation on yourself, create a prohibition on yourself. And that's what we're going to discuss tonight, because the halachas, the laws of a neder, shvuah, are, very important. They're very serious, and these ideas, these concepts come up a lot. And we're going to turn to the Sefer HaChinuch, the Book of Mitzvahs, to understand a little bit more of the distinction between the two, and to get a little bit more of an understanding about making an oath, and some understandings about making an oath in general. Now, the Sefer HaChinuch, the book of the mitzvahs that we mentioned many times before, was written by a sage from the era of the Rishonim, and he goes through the parsha, the mitzvahs of each parsha, giving understanding, reasons behind the mitzvahs, and, laying things out in a basic way to understand what's going on. And actually, we're going to be reading from a mitzvah, not in this week's parsha, but actually back to Parshas Yisro, where we have the third commandment of Eloisis Hashem Hashem Elokecha Lashav, which is translated as "do not bear the name of God in vain," which is referring to swearing in Hashem's name and God's name in vain. And so, swearing is making an oath, is where a person is going to basically, in a very solemn way, try to affirm something or verify something. Or it actually takes forms in many different ways. The question is, primarily, it's really about the forming of the words, what kind of words you're using, as to whether it's a shvuah, it's a neder. But right now, the discussion is going to be a shvuah, an oath. And the discussion is what is referred to as an oath in vain. We very often talk about saying Hashem's name. The person should never say Hashem's name in vain. In the Ten Commandments, and the Torah talks about this prohibition, talks about it in the framework of a shvuah, of making an oath. An oath is something that a person will make an oath in the name of Hashem. Now, let's call it secular terms, a person will say, I swear to God. When you're swearing and you're mentioning Hashem's name in an oath, what you're doing is you're basically trying to affirm what you're saying by connecting it to Hashem, to Hashem's existence. That's what we're going to see here in the Sefer HaChinuch. He says it more clearly a little bit later on. But the point of every shvuah is when you make a shvuah, you are typically going to be making a shvuah by Hashem's name. And what you're doing is you're trying to say that what I'm saying right now is as true as Hashem's existence. And you think about that, that's a pretty serious thing to say. And if it's not going to be true, God forbid, or in vain, that's called saying Hashem's name in vain, or maybe if you're not saying something true, maybe it's even worse. So the first thing that the Sefer Chinuch talks about is that there are 4 types of making an oath in vain. One of them is basically when you're swearing about the obvious, which takes 2 forms. One form of swearing about the obvious is if you swear about a piece of wood and you say, I swear by Hashem's name that this is gold, which is just baloney. Now, of course, not true, but it's like there's not even any point to it. It has no connection to truth whatsoever. So it's completely in vain. Or if you say, I swear, you point to an object that's wood and you say, I swear that's wood. There's no point to that. That's a waste. There's no point to such a thing. And therefore, those are both called making an oath in vain. Another example of an oath in vain is the person swears not to do a mitzvah. You can't swear not to do a mitzvah. You already were obligated by God to do a mitzvah. You can't now swear I'm not going to do it. That's also another form of doing something in vain. There's just no point of what you're saying. And the 4th example is where you take upon yourself in an oath to do something that you can never fulfill. A person swears, I'm not going to sleep for a week. I'm not going to sleep at all for a week. It's impossible to do. And since it's impossible to do, again, you're making an oath, invoking Hashem's name for no purpose. Then the Sefer HaChinuch gets into what he calls the shorish of the mitzvah, which he does by every mitzvah, the root of a mitzvah, and understanding behind the mitzvah, which is, or in a certain way, the lesson from the mitzvah, the message of the mitzvah. And that is that people have to understand that when you are invoking Hashem's name, how serious a matter that is. And the wording that he says is, Ladas b'nei Adam, to let people know and to instill in them, Ki hakel baruch hu Hashem b'shamayim yimal, Hashem that is in heaven above, Chai v'kayam lo'ad, lives and exists eternally, ein kiyum kikiyumay. There is no existence like his, which means that Hashem's existence is inherent. Everything comes from Hashem. Hashem doesn't exist because of something else. Hashem exists because Hashem exists. And therefore his existence is an existence that is like no other existence. So when you're dealing with invoking the name of Hashem in heaven above, who exists eternally, and his existence like no other existence, is the most absolute existence that there is. When you're going to go ahead and invoke Hashem's name on something regarding a matter, this is a matter that we're trying to affirm as Hashem exists, that can't be flippant, that can't be casual. That has to be done in a very serious way. And therefore, not like when you talk about things that are temporary, like human beings, like things in the world, where you can be a little bit more casual when you mention them, and you can even be sometimes will even be frivolous about mentioning them. That cannot happen when you're invoking Hashem's name. And as we've been saying, since a shvuah is about affirming what you're saying by the existence of Hashem, if you're affirming by the existence of Hashem something that's purposeless, then that is not saying Hashem's name in any kind of respectful way, in a reverent way that we should be. If you're trying, and again, especially in this context, where you're trying to affirm something that it exists, like Hashem's existence, is as true as Hashem's existence is true and ultimate. Now to use that in vain is clearly being very irreverent to Hashem. Then he talks about what's called a shvuah sheker, a false oath. And a false oath is different than a oath in vain, because a false oath is one that could be true. There could be a point to it. But the problem is you're not being truthful. So for instance, if a person swears by Hashem's name that he doesn't owe somebody money, and he does, so it could be true that he doesn't owe him, but at the end of the day, it's not true. Which means that you're affirming something untrue by the existence of Hashem. That is a very, very disrespectful way to invoke Hashem, as said before, who exists eternally and whose existence like no other existence. Then there's another form of a false oath, where a person makes an oath that he's going to do something. It's called shvuas bitui, a oath of utterance, where you say, I take upon myself to do this. I take upon myself that I will eat this thing. I will eat this food. Or you say, I take upon myself that I will not eat this food. If you don't keep that oath, again, it's a false oath. And the severity of that is that being that the whole point of every shvu, of every oath, when you make an oath and you say, it is upon me to do this, that the point you're saying is, now in this context, the point is that my words, my commitment to do something is not going to change, just as Hashem's existence doesn't change. You are going to carry this through. You're going to bring this into reality as real as Hashem is. And if you don't fulfill it, so that again, you've linked what you're going to do to Hashem's existence by saying that as Hashem exists, this will come into existence. This will be fulfilled. Well, if you haven't done that, then what is that? Then what does that say about Hashem's existence, which you linked what you're going to do or not do to that? So all these are examples of a shvua and what we call an oath, where basically we have a number of examples where you swear to something, you swear to do something or not to do something, and the essence of a shvua, of an oath, where in all these examples are all examples where you are affirming something by the existence of Hashem. What you're talking about, or what you're going to do, is being affirmed and being said that this is absolutely true, or this absolutely will come into being as Hashem exists, as the being of Hashem. That is what you're doing in essence when you're making an oath. You are affirming, connecting, linking what you're talking about, what you're saying, to Hashem's existence. And therefore, what you are linked to Hashem's existence has to be purposeful, it has to be true, it has to be something you're going to fulfill. Because if it's all linked to Hashem's existence and you do the opposite, then what does that mean? What is that implied from your words about Hashem's existence? So what's important to know about a shvua, it also is the fact that when you make a shvua, which again, let's talk about the shvua where you're going to do something, you're not going to do something. You're basically talking about yourself. I will do this, I will not do this. And when a person goes and makes an oath, he says, Harei Olai, it is upon me to do this. And very often that is done, that you say, it is upon me in the name of Hashem that I'm going to do this. That is what you do when you make an oath, when you make a shvua. You're linking it to Hashem's existence and you're putting something on yourself. And then we have something called a neder. And a neder, the Sefer HaChinuch explains, works very differently. When you make a neder, you're not linking it to Hashem. You're not doing that. Because it's not about affirming or verifying or taking something upon yourself to do or not to do. But what you're doing is, you are taking something that is permitted, and you are now making it forbidden. If this is your object, you can make it forbidden to yourself or to others. It can be permitted to everybody else, but it can and you can make it forbidden just for you or for someone else. And if this is not an object that belongs to you, then it's something that you can make forbidden on yourself, but not on others. But the point here is that what you're doing here is you are making something that was permissible forbidden. And you are, as the Sefer HaChinuch puts it, you are taking this permitted object and you're bringing it into the realm of prohibition, of being forbidden. This is the power that a person has. He says that it's very similar to the power that a person has when they consecrate something, when they make something hektish, when they consecrate something to the Beis HaMikdash, to become the property of the Beis HaMikdash. You take an animal and you consecrate it for a carbon, for a sacrifice. So you have the power through your words to consecrate it. And when you consecrate it, you make it forbidden now, because no one can have any benefit from it. It belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. No one's allowed to have any kind of personal benefit from it. A neder is very similar to that. It's just that you're not consecrating it, but rather you are making it forbidden like one makes an object forbidden when they consecrate it. And in essence, when you make a neder, what you are saying is that I am making this forbidden like something that's consecrated. There's always it's not being spoken outright. It's part of the message. There's, sometimes you can have a shorthand expression of a vow or make something forbidden. But at the end of the day, what you are saying is, you're saying that this permissible thing is now forbidden like this forbidden thing. Now, that forbidden thing that you link it to cannot be something that's forbidden on its own. Because what you're now making forbidden is not forbidden on its own. You're making it forbidden. So you have to link it to something that you make forbidden, such as hektish. Now, hektish becomes forbidden because of the fact that you consecrate it to the Beis Hamikdash. It becomes that property. That makes it forbidden. But you have made it forbidden by doing so. And when you make a neder, which you're not consecrating, but you're just making it forbidden, you are saying that this should be forbidden as like a carbon is forbidden, like a carbon. You're making it forbidden. You're bringing it into the realm of being forbidden. So in essence, the way things break down is that when you wanted to make a distinction between a shvua and a neder, between an oath and between a vow, the difference is that the vow affects you. It effectuates you. You, the person. You bring something upon yourself, whether an obligation, whether a prohibition. But the point is, you are affecting yourself. While when you make a neder, you're affecting the object. You are making the object a forbidden object. Think something that's not kosher is a forbidden object. You have the power, a person has the power through a neder to take something permissible and to make it a forbidden object. Not to everyone, to yourself, to someone else, or to whomever. It's not like hektish that once it's hektish, it's forbidden to everyone. It's not like non-kosher food that's forbidden at least to eat for everyone. Here, this is something that becomes personal to you, personal to someone else, or to a number of people. But the point is, it is a prohibition that has been created, and it is going to be specific to whoever it's designated for. And what you've done is you've changed the object. You've made the object a forbidden object. And there is a halakha ramification to that. And that is that when you use the wording for a neder, you have to make a neder regarding an object, not regarding something that's not an object. So for instance, a person could say, I swear I will not go to this person's house. But you can't say, you can't say that going to someone's house is forbidden for me like a carbon. That's the wording of an neder. That doesn't work on something that's not substantial. It's not a thing. An act is not a thing. But when you want to go ahead and talk about doing an act or not doing an act, the oath is regarding yourself. You're affecting the effect of the neder is it takes so to speak, it takes hold of you. You're affecting yourself. You're not affecting something. You're affecting yourself. A neder. So therefore, if I say I make an oath to do something, not to do something, even though there's no thing here, there's nothing of substance here, it doesn't make a difference because you're the substance. You're aware where this commitment is going to affect. Is going to come into effect. It's going to have to affect on you. While when you make a neder, it's on an object. It's on something. Okay, you cannot say I forbid sleep for an hour on me like a carbon. Sleep is not a thing. You cannot bring sleep into the realm of prohibition like you would an animal when you're sanctifying it. You can make a shvua, you can make an oath, you're not going to sleep for an hour because that's upon you. But a neder has to be on some kind on a thing. And I think there's an interesting point to bring out here, and that is that, sometimes a person might think that when it comes to everything in the Torah, it's like a list. You do this and you don't do this. It's a list. It's a list of rules. You do this, you don't do this. What's happening here, what we see by a neder, is that it doesn't work exactly that way. There are definitely things that the Torah says, that Hashem says, do this, don't do this. Shekel olav on Sukkot, don't eat on Yom Kippur. But when it comes to, let's say, things that are forbidden, like non-kosher food, or other things that are forbidden to us, that in some circumstances, when the thing is forbidden to us, it's not just Hashem says, don't eat that, or you're not allowed to eat that, but rather the object itself is a forbidden object. There is a prohibition that takes hold of this object. Just as an analogy, I'm not trying to say exactly the same thing, but it's like something that's radioactive. So if it's radioactive, you don't go near. And there are certain things, non-kosher food, something you make forbidden through a neder, or other things that are forbidden to partake from. It's not just a rule, don't do this. It's rather because there is something, so to speak, there is something wrong with this. There's something not right about. There's something wrong with this. There is a prohibition that lies, so to speak, on this object. There's something wrong with this object, so to speak. That's why it's forbidden, and that's the difference here between, as we're saying, between the oath, between the shua, and between the neder. Now, another interesting thing that the Sefer HaChinuch gets into is that we know that there is a concept called hataras nedarim, that if a person makes a vow or an oath, whichever way, and very often, that there is that when a person makes a vow or an oath, they could actually have it nullified. And actually, and even though the Torah says you shall not desecrate your word, the sages derive from the wording of the Torah, or at least it's alluded to in the wording of the Torah, that, so to speak, you cannot desecrate your words, meaning you must listen to your words, but others can actually, so to speak, desecrate your words. They can make your words in a way that they don't have to be fulfilled anymore. And that's the power that we refer to as hataras nedarim. The word neder is very often used in a kind of generic way, both for a vow, what we spoke about, and both for an oath. We were trying to talk about where the words are used in very distinctive ways. But the word neder is also used in a generic form as a very solemn word that you're saying regarding whatever it may be. So there is the power of hatara, where it can be nullified. How is it nullified? Well, you need either a sage that is very proficient in the laws of vows and oaths, or you need a beis din, you need a rabbinical court that understands how things work when it comes to annulling a vow, to nullifying a vow. Now, the first thing actually the Sefer HaChinuch says in a very interesting way is that based on the way we explained, at least the shvu, an oath, which is that you are saying that what you commit yourself to will not change as Hashem's existence doesn't change. If that's what you're doing, then it really makes no sense to be able to nullify it, because you linked it to Hashem's existence. God's existence can't be nullified. So how can you nullify your commitment that you link to that? But says the Sefer HaChinuch, Hashem, it's one of Hashem's kindnesses with us, knowing, so to speak, how fickle we've been made, and that things change, situations change, and we're finding ourselves in a difficult situation, being able to continue keeping the vow, the oath that we made. Hashem was kind with us, and He allowed us to be able to nullify it. Now, the mechanism. Now we know that on Erev Rosh Hashanah we do what's called hataras nedarim, nullification of the vows, annulling the vows. And so what we know, we open up a machzor, a siddur, and we stand in front of three people, and we make this whole declaration. And after the declaration is made, we go ahead and the beis din says mutar lach, mutar lach, mutar lach. Everything is permitted. That means it's been annulled. What's the mechanism here? What is this? How does it work? So the way it works is that when a person makes a vow, if we can somehow or another look at the vow or consider the vow that it was made unwilling or mistakenly, then we can say that the vow was a mistake. And if it was a mistake, then it doesn't take effect. Now, there is one form of a mistaken vow that you don't need to go to if it ever happens, you should go to a rabbi to make sure about it. But this process of annulling a vow, there are certain mistaken vows that don't need that at all. Because if I do anything based on a mistake, meaning something was done on a principal premise, and it was just wrong, and that was my basis for what I did, it's a mistake. Mistakes are things that basically don't take effect. So just an example. A person makes an oath. I will never give a gift to my son, or I forbid all my money on my son because he's an alcoholic. So the whole premise of the oath, of the vow, is because he's an alcoholic. And then you find out it's not true. It was a mistake. So if the whole premise of the vow was a mistake, the vow never took effect. But when you want to use the mechanism of Hataras Nedarim, there the mistake is not as obvious. Because what you're doing by Hataras Nedarim is, you're saying, so a person made a vow. He made the vow. But something comes up later that because of something new, not necessarily unexpected, it's something that can normally happen, it just wasn't relevant or happening yet. But because of something that comes into being, something comes up later, because of that, you realize that, if I would have known this is going to happen, I never would have made the vow. Now, when you made the vow, that issue wasn't there. You didn't know about it. It didn't exist. Now, again, if something didn't exist, it depends how common or uncommon it is, whether based on that you could annul the vow or the oath. But the mechanism here is that you're making it a mistake in as much that if I would have known what would happen when I made the vow, I never would have made it. That's the mechanism of Hataras Nedarim. That is, and that reasoning needs a sage to accept, and based on that, annul the vow. And when it's annulled retroactive. But without that official annulment, it's not going to be taken off, because you can't say the premise was a mistake. Everything was fine at the time. It's just that something comes up later that makes me regret ever making it in a way that if I would have known about it, then I never would have made it. That's the mechanism of annulling a vow or an oath. That's how it works. So just as it's an important understanding of something that we do every Rosh Hashanah, and something that may need to be done by a person even not then. A person made a vow, and they realize that it's very difficult for them to keep it anymore. That is possible then to go to find 3 people, convene them as a Beis Din. The Beis Din understands the mechanism of how a vow is annulled. The person presents the reason to annul the vow, and then it can be annulled. If it's not going to be annulled, if you don't go through this process, it's not going to be annulled. But it's annulled based on the idea that if the person making the vow would have known later on that something would come up, meaning if he would have known something later came up after making the vow that makes him regret he made the vow. And we can say that if he would have known about that reason not to have the vow, if he would have known about that when he first made the vow and never would have made it, that is the mechanism by which a vow or an oath can be annulled. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful evening.